How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Gangi. Welcome to another episode of Tier Talk. Guys, we've discussed in past shows that I feel that we're losing a lot of senior staff. That means that there's a lot of good behaviors, a good observable actions that we are losing because senior staff is leaving with their experience, and unfortunately they're taking certain behavior, certain finesse with them. And some of our rookies really don't know where to look to get some of the knowledge that I was lucky to have when I was moving up in the profession. Believe it or not, it's a lot more than just learning in a classroom. It's actually seeing stuff being applied in real time and just being able to observe really good senior staff moving. You know, definitely for me, one of the most important parts of me growing in this profession was watching others maneuver. That was the key, seeing it in real time. So today's episode is going to be related to a part of inmate interactions that I feel may not always be taught, should be observed, but I'm going to try my best to translate it to words. I have my boy Joel Pomponio on. We're going to discuss this together. This is definitely senior experience talking because this is not something I knew going in. This is something that had to be taught to me. And for me, this is why I'm making a lot of these videos about back to the basics, because I'm really trying to go back and remember what was taught to me. That was the key. I think the assumptions of what people know is going to be different now because we're losing a lot of senior staff. So I'm truly going back in my head, asking myself, what were the things that were taught to me in my effort to provide some of these lessons back to not just our rookies, but even our senior staff who may have forgotten that some of the things that they know today is because it was taught to them through good senior staff. So today's episode is going to be about managing inmate interactions through expectations. Again, my partner in this dialogue is going to be Joel Pomponio. But before we do that, let me get to my sponsors. First sponsor is American Military University. If you guys looking to get a degree, seek higher education, please check out American Military University. They're very supportive of what we do in corrections, also very supportive of what we do here on Tier Talk. So again, you want to bring experience into the classroom, please check out American Military University. We also have my books on the market, Inmate Manipulation Decoded. Guys, this fills in the gap when it comes to training on inmate manipulation. Guys, please, if you get a chance, check out this book. This book does very well, so thank you for those who are supporting it. And this book is available on Amazon. Link to that is in the description. We also have How to Succeed in Corrections, Lessons Learned While Working in a Prison. Guys, it's got tons of information, including a little bit about what we're going to discuss now when it comes to leading through expectation. This book is available at Blue 360 Media. Link to that is in the description. I also have another book coming out that's going to partner with this book. It's got about 42 other tips. That's going to be great. So you get a nice little collection here. And that book will be coming out shortly. It's already in the editor's hands. And I thought this was cool today. The book here that you just saw, How to Succeed in Corrections, this book right here, actually was recognized as December is Read a New Book a Month. Let's celebrate the wonderful authors amongst us. Tell a friend. Author Anthony Gangi, book title, How to Succeed in Corrections. And this is through the International Council for Women in Law Enforcement. They recognized the book as a good read. So that was pretty humbling, if I may say so myself. I thought that was pretty awesome. So again, this is the book, guys. Got tons of advice. A piece of our dialogue today is going to be from this. And I think eventually, maybe later on in the future, I'm going to write another book on interactions with inmates. But in the meantime, I have it in this book, and I have it in the book that we have coming out. Let me get Joe on. What's up, Joe?
What's happening, Anthony?
It's been a while, Joe. I think people forgot about you. Can you reintroduce yourself, please?
Absolutely. My name is Joe Pomponio. I am a retired lieutenant from the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, or formerly known as the Texas Department of Corrections. 29 years and 6 months. I'm currently working for our local county jail facility, and I am a panel member on Tier Talk.
Does your local county facility approve you coming on Tier Talk?
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, they see the videos and they enjoy the talk because believe it or not, a lot of the county people there that are there now are ex-DOC people. You know, have kind of filtered in over the years as they retired, because with the county you get a second retirement. You know, where the state pays one retirement and the county's a second. So we've all kind of migrated down to the county level and taken that facility hostage.
taking the word jailing literally. Go from a state to a jail. Well, cheers to your county. I'm sure they're doing great work, especially if they have you in their corner. Big fan of you, Joe, but now I'm a big fan of the county that saw your potential. So I think this is a needed dialogue. I want to read something brief. Now, guys, I do have a whole section in the book about leading through expectation. It's a quick little passage, but towards the end of this book, I have a quick little section about 19 tips for interacting with inmates, and one of it says expectations. And this is real quick. It just says, the professional working relationship between inmates and staff is centered around expectations. As I became more senior and discretion was developed, it has been my experience that even though I see the rules as a pillar that guides me through each inmate interaction, my control is expressed through expectations. Therefore, rules are enforced through expectations that define the working relationship. If ever I find myself expressing the rules in order to gain compliance, it's because there's a failure of the inmate to follow what has been contractually agreed upon. And this comes from this book here, but also I have a section of that in the up and coming book. I thought it would be good to just express that thought again, the 19 tips for interacting with inmates. Except in the other book, I made it 20, just to kind of have a round number. But the reason why I wanted to do this again, Joe, is I just want to kind of reintroduce some of the basics, because I feel that's being lost a little bit today. And today we're making assumptions, automatically assuming that a lot of things are being passed down, but they may not be, because again, a lot of the stuff that I learned was through behavior that I could observe, and I think that we have lost that a bit. So I'm trying to kind of go back and really look at the stuff that I've learned at a very fundamental level, at a very basic level, knowing that I did not walk in knowing this, so I really can't safely assume that the knowledge I have now is knowledge that people are getting coming in. I have to remember that everything that I've learned up until this point has been taught to me, whether it was through communication or whether it was just me watching them, work the magic, So, but Joe, do you agree it's a good time to kind of revisit the basics, because the assumptions that we have that people should automatically know may not be there?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And it's due to just several factors. I mean, number one, your veteran staff isn't that veteran anymore. A lot of your veteran staff we're rapidly approaching that cycle, if we're not already in that cycle, where, your veteran staff are getting ready to retire. You're losing people to other fields for whatever reason. In this state, alone, a veteran could be 2 years in the system. So, the one thing to keep in mind is, the expectations of passing stuff down is fundamentally important, due to the fact that, we know we're not always going to be there. And I know I spent my last year trying to help everybody and anybody that I could with my wisdom and my school of hard knocks and how I came in. And we've lost a lot of that over the last couple of years, but, for whatever reason, whether it was COVID or, due to retirements and stuff. And we've been so focused on recruiting that we've lost sight of, what we call here, and we actually have a policy on it in our prison systems, called back to basics. And it was designed just for that reason, because, we've been when you're in a position for a certain length of time, or you're in a facility for a certain length of time, you've gotten so used to the normal flow and being on autopilot that, the little things tend to fall to the wayside, especially when you're dealing with new staff. And it's one of those aha moments, later on down the road where you remember it, but, it's one of the things that you should have passed on at the time. So, I definitely agree. We've lost a lot of our back to basics capabilities over time.
And I've done a few shows so far to kind of explain that. A show I did recently with Russ was old school versus new school. We kind of talked about some old school tactics that at this point we're hoping translates into new school lessons. One of the areas we have touched on is expectation versus rules, but I was kind of at work today and I had a lot of stuff going through my mind, and I was just thinking of this. It just kept on coming into my head for some reason. So when I had a chance, I was like, went on my phone and basically took some notes of what I thought would be some good areas to discuss. But the reason why I want to focus again on this topic, because this is definitely something that matters in corrections, how we interact with the inmate population. I really do think that running a unit through expectation does have long-term application. But let me explain where this came into mind. And the funny thing is, guys, I've actually utilized this for many years. I just didn't know I was utilizing it until a senior officer kind of explained it to me. And then I was able to relate to them. Sometimes you never know how to explain what you're doing, and someone just is able to explain it. You're like, holy shit, that's what I do. So I happen to work in a very maximum security facility, and we oversee a lot of inmates that are kind of like in restorative housing, so the jail within the jail, if you will. And I like to watch the different officers interact and, how they manage a unit like that, because those units like that are very hard to manage because it's not really a unit that's governed by the rules. I'm not saying we break them, and I'm not saying, I'm just saying it's hard to enforce rules when you have inmates that don't want to listen to them. So there's a different finesse with the type of officers that work those units. Definitely officers that really know how that inmate dynamic works, how to interact with the inmate population. So you can walk into one unit, it's extremely noisy, extremely chaotic, and then the same type of inmates in another unit would be extremely quiet. And, the consistency technically may not be there in how it's ran, because, again, you got one unit that is very loud and yelling, and then you got another unit that's quiet. So I'm like, well, there's a little inconsistency here. So let me go to the officer that's got the quiet unit and try to get some advice. So I sit down with the officer, and the officer teaches me on old school ruling. Old school jailing, basically leading through expectation, because the first thing he says is, well, Gangi, the reason why it's quiet is because the inmates know what to expect from me, and I also know what to expect from them. And as he broke down the dialogue, there's a few key points that he gave me that I really never expressed on the channel before, relating to leading through expectation. I thought we could explore today. So basically, I think this dialogue really comes into play when these are units that really can't be run by pen and paper, right? Because these inmates are used to breaking the rules. So you definitely need a different type of officer to work in these units. And I love the expectation because, as I said, when I walk in, the inmates know what to expect from me. So there's a level of consistency there. And then I know what to expect from them. And again, it kind of gives you some level of consistency to work with. So the first thing the person mentioned today, that this is really an old school dynamic. Basically officers that have kind of walked the walk for some years, they know how to interact with the inmates, and it's not so easily taught. It's more like if I had a rookie next to me, I would just tell the rookie, sit down, watch what I do. Because I may not be able to translate what I do, but I want you to watch. Because that sometimes is the best way to learn, right? You're watching the person maneuver, and you're seeing things in real time. As I mentioned, the concern we have today is we may not have those senior staff that we can observe. But right off the bat, he said, it's old school tactics. I don't know how to explain it, but I just need you to watch me. Does that make sense to you, Joe?
Yeah, some things are better seen than heard. It's a lot easier to, whatever that is that you're learning something new. Sometimes it's easier to actually watch than it is to go hands on.
But let me ask you a question, Joe, on this. What is it that has to be seen that may not be so easily taught through words? What is it that if I was a senior officer, I would really want this rookie to watch me do?
Well, I would want the rookie officer to see what my expectations of myself are first. When I hit an area or I'm assigned to an area, what are my expectations of myself? I want an orderly area. I want a clean area. I want an area clean, free of violence. I want an area that, achieves, a lot of offender compliance. And that's not something that you can read in a book, or it's not something you can pick up by reading words off of a page. The best way to observe that is by actions. But in order to have expectations of others, you have to have expectations of yourself first.
I like that. And you know what this senior officer said to me? I really took notes. I took notes and then later on translated it to my notebook on my phone. But I had a notebook with me at the time. And again, the reason why this is important to me is because we have a lot of new people coming in, and I need to understand their perspective, where they're coming from. And one thing he said, he goes, the good thing, this is a senior officer that's run the unit through expectation. He said, the good thing about running a unit through expectation, I love this, so I want to get it out there, is that once you note what the expectations are, usually it's when the inmate first comes into the unit and you introduce yourself to some extent and kind of find out a little bit about them. So he does make it his business to introduce himself to every inmate that comes into his unit. But he says once he notes his expectations, what he expects, and he does actually ask the inmate, what do you expect from me? So I think that's pretty unique. He says after that, the expectations become unspoken. It's just, I know your role, you know mine, and it's not something that has to constantly be reminded and reinforced. It becomes like, I don't want to say the word rules, but technically it does. It does establish some level of unspoken rules, because remember, the expectations that the officer is laying forth is filtered or actually maybe strengthened by the rules of what governs policy and procedure, but it's how he translates it into personal expectations and vice versa. So I do like the fact this guy's the 5-day officer. He meets every inmate that comes into his unit, gets to know what they're about a little bit, and then kind of tells, like, this is what I'm expecting from you. This is what you should expect from me. And then eventually he says, once that dynamic is created, pretty much everything becomes unspoken. It just starts to create a positive momentum. What's your thoughts on that, Joe? I think that's pretty impressive.
That is pretty impressive. And there's been times where I've done the same. But the good thing about understanding expectations of each other is just that. Once they understand what you expect of them, and you understand what to expect from them themselves, it does become an unspoken. I guess you could call it a rule, an unspoken rule, but it's more of a general understanding, where each party knows what to expect from each other, and at that point it's all about follow through.
Yeah, and as I said, it's okay to kind of introduce yourself to the inmate, let them know what you're about, and then you can kind of see what they're a little bit about. I think, to be honest with you, here's another thing that may be overlooked is if you're the first person to meet that inmate in that new unit, you get to set the initial impression. So having said that, I'm not saying everything's 100%, but they meet you first before they meet everyone else. There's a good chance that initial interaction create a bit of a positive impact. I mean, right from the get-go. I mean, you're the first person they're going to meet. Again, nothing's 100%, but I think it does put the odds slightly in your favor. And again, when it comes to the expectation, you're right. We're not saying it's a written rule, but it does set the standards right at the beginning that don't have to constantly be reminded. So he also mentioned that when he leads to expectation, basically it's like a higher level of accountability, and it's less reactionary. So I get that. So I do believe rules could be technically reactionary. Someone breaks it, you chase them down and say, hey, listen, you're getting written up because you've broken this rule, blah, blah, blah. But it looks like it's more reactionary or more situational, where when you do through expectations, it's a higher level of behavior accountability, which means this is the type of behavior that I expect. Hopefully it's good, positive behavior. And then this is how positive behavior applies to a bigger picture, as opposed to saying, hey, that was wrong. That specific action was wrong. This is someone saying that, hey, this is the positive behavior, and this is what I expect as you carry out that positive behavior. I just think it has a wider application. I get what he's trying to say there. I may not be translating correctly, but I think what he's trying to say is that when he sets the standard for positive behavior at the higher level, it has wider application than just specifically enforcing rule by rule by rule by rule. Now, mind you, I just want to make another thing noted. This is a dynamic that really senior staff teach through observation, as we mentioned. So at the very beginning, if you're rookie, you are going to be driven by the rules. You have to be, because again, you're going to get tested, and you got to kind of test your ability to say no, and then eventually you develop discretion. I think discretion could equate to some level of expectation. But again, it's something that you're going to go into. So at first, I get it. If you're new, we expect you to be driven by the rules to some extent. But eventually, you're going to lean towards working your way to employing discretion and ultimately setting those expectations. So it's funny because when I looked at both these units, I saw extremes. I saw a rookie at the beginning of his career, basically going rule crazy. And then I saw a senior person with a quieter unit running through expectations. And in the middle is where the transition is. And again, it's gradual. It doesn't happen overnight, but it's definitely something that as a rookie, you want to try to hopefully have senior staff you can observe it from, but hopefully this dialogue at least makes you aware of where these dynamics can go. But what's your thoughts on that, Joe? What's your thoughts on expectations hold people to a higher level of accountability of what would be considered accepted behavior in general, as opposed to kind of, constantly running by the rules and running a unit really based on reaction?
Well, what I like most about that dynamic from that senior officer that made that quote, especially when these inmates are coming in, if you have an intake supervisor or a shift commander or shift lieutenant, whatever, and they're automatically setting that standard with that single inmate, the good thing about that is the inmate's already got it on his mind. Well, hell, if this lieutenant is telling me singly that this is his expectation, this is how he runs his facility, he's automatically thinking the officers underneath him are on that same page. So not only is he setting the tone for himself and that inmate, he's also setting the tone for the rest of his staff too, that, this offender is going to interact with at some point. I love that dynamic. And, I think that's one that needs to be used more often with the inmate population. When you're running an area, leading by expectation is the only way to go. It's not one of those don't talk about it, do it. Being firm, fair, and consistent in your duties as you're leading the expectations that you require from the inmate population is really more important than anything. That'll always persevere over, being what they call a writ rider, enforcing rules by paper or, which is a lot of times could be avoided if you set your expectations.
Yeah, I want to comment. So I'm going to, in context here, I'm going to say the word partnership, but it's not, I'm not trying to equate partnership to equal level of authority. So I want you guys to listen to what I'm saying in context here. I'm gonna say partnership in regards to the officer and the inmate working together to run an effective unit. But again, I'm not equating partnership to equal levels of authority. Obviously, we know the officer has the authority, but there does have to be a working relationship between the officer and the inmate. I would like to say agreed partnership that does produce an effective unit, because again, if anyone breaks from that agreement, then the unit does fall into a bit of chaos. So again, I want to just mention, because I always be careful with the words we say here. I'm not using the word partnership to equate to equaling out authority, but rather just a partnership between the officer and the inmate to create a workable dynamic, if you will. So now, with that said, well, first off, let me just, does that context make sense, Joe, and what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, it absolutely makes sense. I mean, regardless of, if you're the keeper or the kept, there's got to be some sort of understanding in the middle, regardless. It's not a partnership. It's you setting the tone, him setting the tone, and then there's an understanding in the center, and that understanding is your tone and their tone. And you know exactly where you fall and what part you play.
Right. So I noticed from one unit to the other. Let's go back to the rookie unit, who's constantly having to reinforce the rules. Now, by the way, I get it; they're new, and at that point, obviously there should be support from senior staff as well as supervisors. But I find that the rookie was drained because they're constantly reinforcing the rules, and they have to. Again, I mean, this is just them setting up their boundaries, or not barriers. Let's do barriers, because boundaries is like inside out. Let's do barriers. They're setting up like, no, you're not going to cross this line, you're not going to cross that line. And I get it, because having said that, they're new. So it's not about talking about their expectations. They have to showcase them in their behaviors, where this officer, the senior officer, has already established that. So basically they're, at a higher level when it comes to what they have to do and what they don't have to do. But the rookie, again, is constantly reinforcing that rule dynamic. And
you said it perfectly right there, just with the word establish. You got the rookie officer who's trying to establish himself, and then you have the senior officer who's already established. So
yeah, right. And I like what you're saying. The reason why I'm saying that is this. Maybe at the very beginning of your career, you can have the energy, and you need the energy to do that. But I think at one point, once you have that time in, and you really start understanding the dynamic and working itself out, I mean, you don't want to be constantly having to reinforce the rules. You want to lead by some level of expectation. And again, when I say that, guys, it doesn't mean we're supporting inmates breaking the rules. I'm not saying that. All I'm saying is that level of expectation may be able to give you a chance to kind of step back and let the unit do what it's supposed to do, and then you only have to get involved when there's a failure to meet those expectations. But as I said, the officer pretty much said this, that when I got all the quotes here, that where am I? That when the inmate understands what those expectations are, the unit starts to run automatic. And I'm not saying people are complacent in this, because I don't want those naysayers here, but hear what I'm saying. Those senior officers, you know exactly what that means. That means when the inmate starts to understand what those expectations are, the officer can kind of let the unit run without having to constantly reinforce the rules, because again, it's the higher level acceptable behavior is there. It's there. Joe, what's your thoughts on that quote?
Yeah, I mean, and it's absolutely true. If you set the expectations, and what I used to teach back in the academies was, if you point out the little stuff, it won't turn into the big stuff. And it's more of a respectability factor on both ends of that spectrum. Example, you got an inmate walking down the hallway, the back of his shirt's untucked and he's sagging his pants a little bit. If you tighten him up then he knows whenever I'm working the hallway, I better be right and tight. But again, you have to set that expectation. You have to have that expectation of yourself to have an orderly facility, and you have to have that expectation of the offender population to follow that.
Joe, if I can add to this, I would love to. I just thought of something right now. It just came to my mind right now. Okay, so it's not on here. As we just discussed this, I'm very empathetic. I can easily put myself into someone's head and think of 20 different scenarios and motives, whatever it is. I'm thinking if I was a senior cop and someone was arguing with me about how it may appear that I'm laid back, but mind you, I'm not, and I'm kind of letting the unit kind of run through those expectations, and I may get that officer that's defined by the book, who's constantly reinforcing the rules. My argument to that officer who thinks I'm kind of doing it wrong, I would say to this officer, well, the difference between us is when an inmate walks into my unit's established. When they walk into your unit, you're still creating it.
Absolutely.
That's
absolutely that's the perfect quote right there. It's not that I'm laid back. It's that I'm already established. My authority is already established. They know what to expect from me. You, as a rookie officer, are still trying to establish yourself. It is your job to expand and assert your own authority and run your facility. And that is like that's the perfect quote. It's not that, and I thought the same thing as a rookie officer when I came in. You see the bosses standing around the desk. They're not really hollering. They're not yelling. They're not, and you got 50 inmates in the hallway passing in either direction during mass movement. They're single file, not a word's being spoken, hands behind their back, and they're marching in line to and from their living areas. And I'm thinking, I was taught in the academy that, we should be doing some sort of yelling of something, But the fact was, and in hindsight now, when I look back on these officers, when I first came in, was the fact that they were already established. They were already established. The offender population knew what to expect from them and knew what they wanted, and with those officers, there was a lot of them that, did pass down some of that guidance before they retired. And there was a lot that didn't. And we need more of those veteran officers to pass down some of those, I don't want to say expectations, but traditions. Hey, I've noticed the way you run your pod. And I'm not saying you're doing it wrong. I'm not saying that at all. But here's some things that might help you. So you're not running yourself into the ground, going from cell to cell saying, hey, get this down. Hey, get that down. Hey, get this down. Hey, tighten that up. We need more officers to do that, to not only showcase, their knowledge, but to also help the rookie employees elevate themselves a little bit quicker.
Yeah, and Joe, I gotta mention, if I'm a senior officer and I got years in and I'm still running around reinforcing the rules, I mean, maybe it is because I haven't really established some level of consistency in what my expectations are and how I translate that to the population and what they translate back to me. I really do think that, that may set me back to I'm still creating that. As I said, seeing a senior officer kind of have a unit that kind of runs on its own versus another officer who's all over the place. But again, in this case, that was a rookie. But imagine if that rookie was a senior officer and then I saw the difference. I'm like, wow, that's a problem. So like if I saw a rookie versus senior, I expect some differences. But if I saw a senior doing it this way and another senior doing it this way, and one's chaotic and one unit is calm, I do think, I would go back to the person who's kind of got a more chaotic unit and say, hey, how many years you got? I got 10 years, whatever. Okay, so what's going on here? Why don't we have any level of control? And most likely what you're going to get is the blame game. The blame. It's like, yeah, but hold on, your partner next door, same type of inmates, and there's a lot calmer. So I think they tend to be more established in how they run their unit, and you're kind of running like a chicken without a head because you're trying to still create it. And I do think, and then the other thing he mentioned, which I love, was he goes, Gangi, here's another thing that again may not be so surface. He goes, but when you're constantly running these type of units, by always going back to the rules. Now, mind you guys, there are certain things you got to write. There is no leeway around it. I don't have to spell that out. Obviously there are certain things that have tremendous liability connected to it within the inmate's actions that you have no choice. You better write it. But there are certain things that connection. I can still hear it. There you go. There are certain charges that are there that even though they may be smaller charges, I think they're kind of put there so staff can utilize as leverage to motivate good behavior. So basically I could write you for this, but you know what? Why don't you go ahead and do this and we'll work together at this level of, again, mutual expectation. But one of the things he mentioned to me, Joe, that I thought was spot on is for the officers that constantly go to that rule book all the time, even for the minor, especially in units here, like as I said, are very RH, restrictive housing units, which really don't really govern well with solely going by the rules. There really is some level of expectation involved in that. He goes, you create a dynamic of win-win or win-loss. And he goes, so let's win-loss would come from constantly writing them up, and then you're going to win some charges, you're going to lose some charges, and it's just it's a competitive dynamic between you and the inmate, and it just doesn't set up because you wind up always the cat chasing the mouse. I'm going to win it, I'm going to lose it, and you just keep on piling up. He goes, but expectations is usually a win-win. Because at the end of the day, you do what's expected, you get what's expected, and vice versa. And there's not a competition here because we're doing what we need to do in that partnership to help create a successful running unit. So that's kind of where I employ the word partnership. And again, it's not an equal authority. I'm not equating it to equal authority. I'm equating it as the win-win. Like, because again, if I'm constantly enforcing the rules and you're not following them, okay, it's win-loss, win-loss, win-loss. I mean, not all my charges are going to stick. You know, you're not going to win every charge, so it's a win-loss. It's a win-loss. It's I got your moment, and it becomes, again, the cat chasing the mouse. When you do the expectation, it could translate into a win-win because there is an agreement. This is what I expect from you. This is what you should expect from me. And let's make sure we can get from point A to point B with minimal amount of bullshit in between. What's your thoughts on that? Win-loss, win-win?
Yeah, and I totally agree with that. You know, due to the fact that, and not even in a restrictive housing environment. I mean, even in general population environment, a win-win is a win-win. You know, going to the rule book all the time. You know that there are charges where there's no discretion. You know, assaults or possession of a weapon, drugs, whatever. You know that. And the inmate population knows that. They know if they get caught with it, they know they're going to get smoked. You know, but for the minor infractions, you know, going to the rule book, you know, and if you go to the rule book every time, you know, that's I guess that's ultimately your choice. But something you got to realize later on down the road is that doesn't do anything for your expectations. Yes, they know that you're going to write them a case for each and every infraction, but that doesn't gain you any respect amongst the offender population. You know, a good verbal judo will work every time if you verbalize your expectations. You know, I had officers that would walk onto a cell block and right off the bat, hey, I'm telling you now, if I find a towel hanging up, if I find a cover over your light, if I find a clothesline up, I'm taking it and I'm taking everything that goes with it. And what happens? You start hearing papers shuffling, you start hearing things being moved. And when an officer walks to run, all the cells are in compliance. That's because they verbalize their expectations. And if you can do that, gain your compliance, you still maintain a level of respectability with the offender population at the same time. Now, that same officer could have very well just stepped on the block, went down the block, and just started writing ticket after ticket after ticket after ticket after ticket. At the end of the day, what have you really accomplished? Mm-hmm. You've written all these disciplinary cases, your hands hurting like hell, when you could have just verbalized your expectations from the get-go and maintained your compliance. You know, when you look at the restrictive housing side of things, most of the offenders in restrictive housing, they're doing, you know, well, I don't want to call it solitary anymore because we don't have solitary. You know, most of these offenders are maxed out anyways. They're maxed out on their disciplinary sanctions. So if you think they give a damn about your piece of paper that you're going to put on them, they don't. But the same thing applies. If you verbalize your expectations, you know, you walk by a cell, the inmate's got his T-shirt hanging up. You know, I would just yank it down off the line and toss it on his bed. I told you before, you know better. I'm not fixing to say it again. You right, Lieutenant. You right. You know, you've automatically set that boundary. You verbalized your expectations, and at the same time, you've also verbalized your boundary. This is what I expect. But that's something that's got to come out of your mouth, not, you know, that's not something you can do with paper.
Yeah, and I like to add, as before we close, is that I believe running it through expectation, one of the last things mentioned, it is more long-term. It's established. It just sets it, things moving forward. So it is more long-term and less immediate. So I think when it comes to being more long-term, you get the momentum going in a positive direction, and you're not spending all day putting out fires and running to the next one. So I thought this was a good dialogue. I mean, it's not a catch-all. It's one aspect of many different levels of inmate dynamics. We'll definitely have another discussion again on some more inmate dynamics. I have done this discussion before, but every time I do a discussion, I like to add more to it. So again, if you really want to, you know, full insight, check out the other times I've discussed this topic, but this will add to it because we definitely never touched on the established versus the creative side. We never touched on the short term versus the long term, the win-loss versus the win-win. I mean, this whole dialogue was pretty much a new perspective on a discussion that really needs to be had at this point, because again, it's we're not seeing the behavior that much anymore. So I'm trying to see if I could, with the help of Joe, with the help of Russ, the people that come on the show, if we could translate now what would be usually seen if you had the right staff in front of you.
All right. In closing, let me just say that, expectations are everything, but you need to have expectations of yourself first before you go into the job, or should I say go into the area for the first time. You got to have expectations of yourself. You need to sit down and actually think about, what kind of officer do I want to be? What do I want of the offender population? Do I want to be the type of officer that's running from cell to cell to cell all night long, or putting out, as Anthony says, fires? Or do I want to be that officer that hits the block and sets my tone right off the bat and my expectations? Not only makes your life a little bit easier, but also lets the offender population know where your boundaries are. That's something that you need to think about. Like I said, you got to have expectations of yourself first, before you can have expectations of anybody else. Emulate yourself, not always to the quiet boss, not always to the noisy boss. There are people that you can actually watch and, understand what they do and why they do it. At the same time, the veteran staff, we need to do a better job of taking these rookie officers under our arms and, teaching them, which is something that should be taught at more academies, that, that we stress rules and paper, verbal judo. I can't stress it enough. If you communicate effectively, your expectations will always be met. But that's something you have to think about. But you guys be safe, and I hope y'all get some knowledge from what we discussed tonight.
Yeah, and again, guys, the dialogue is meant to fill the gap. I think it's definitely needed dialogue, especially one of the most important things in our job is interacting with the inmate population. So I think it's good to find where we see those gaps, and then I will try my best to go ahead and fill those gaps with other people who have experience, and just kind of taking the dialogue uh, in context, guys. That's another thing, guys. Sometimes the dialogues are a little bit longer. The reason why is because it's a lot more than providing a tip. You got to provide a context that surrounds the tip. You have to build a level of understanding of why things need to be employed, and it doesn't come across in just a surface tip. It comes across through the application. Basically, this is why I do it, and within the context we provide. So again, I think it was a great dialogue. As always, guys, the show is Tier Talk. If you haven't, please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. Bell's going to notify you every time I post a video. Stay safe.